Carl and Liam here from Games, Brains and Head-Banging Life, gbhblofficial for short, and it's a Let's Talk. You've seen the title. We are about to talk about the Hellraiser franchise. We're not reviewing them. This is not a review. We've written those reviews. Liam has written all of them, barring one, I think, maybe. I think I've done one, which is the latest one. Did I do the latest Hellraiser?
That was me.
So I think you've written them all, haven't you?
I do feel like you did one. I feel like we should know the content on our website.
Which one would I have done?
You did the definitive ranking of them, but it was based on my ratings.
Yeah, that's right. The definitive ranking's just taking your. It cut and copied your words.
No, I've done them all. Yeah.
Which is a rarity in this sense, in that franchises, you're not often big on covering franchises in depth, it seems. So, but the fact that Hellraiser effectively became your standalone franchise, I think I may not have even done a remake specifically because of that reason. So that adds a new nuance, because I've done the Nightmare on Elm Street, I've done the Friday the 13th, I've done the Halloween, and some of the lesser known franchises as well. These are the big ones we're talking about, whereas Hellraiser is completely and utterly yours. And it's interesting. I find it fascinating because I have to look at a review and think, well, I don't agree with that score at all. You know, that kind of thing. But what you're going to do, I didn't write it. I don't get to fuck with it. That's it. It's author based. But of course, I've got a lot of knowledge about the franchise. It's an experience I've been through. In fact, I think in YouTube, we actually have a video between me and Lou where we actually talk through every film from our perspective in this big YouTube video, back when we used to do those before they got way too exhausting and too time consuming to continue doing. So we're going to do that now. We're going to talk about the franchise as a whole, not so much about specific knowledge or like specific facts that you can read about on Wikipedia and shit like that. You can read all of that. This is about feelings, about thoughts, about passions, about interest, about where you think the franchise could go, if it's got any future in it, and I mean proper future. I know what's rumored, I know what's said, but we're talking about longevity more than anything else, where the franchise deserves love, where it deserves hate, and so on and so forth, etc., etc. So the very first question is this, and it's really simple. What is your immediate, I say to you, Hellraiser, what comes to mind?
Well, the most obvious thing that would come to mind is obviously Pinhead and Doug Bradley and his performance as Pinhead, and I think that's an iconic character in horror.
No, I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm gonna hold you to a better answer than that. That's not good enough. Yes, you might think of Pinhead, but in what context? Is it a specific scene? Is it a pose? Is it an image? That's what I want.
To me, if I was all right, you want to know specifically about Pinhead now or Hellraiser? Okay.
Well, no, but about what you said. Pinhead is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Hellraiser, but it can't just be. It's what about what image is it? Is it a scene from a movie or is it a cover?
It's just like I said, just Pinhead like saying some kind of monologue, and Doug Bradley putting on that beautiful tone that he manages to put on into the character, the makeup, and stuff like that. But obviously, as time went on, certain performances he did in some of the movies kind of shoehorned in and felt a bit phoned in as well. But yeah, I think that just his character, his presence when he's on screen, you can't help but look away. Yeah, he just epitomizes the whole Hellraiser, franchise that he is Hellraiser.
Do you think time and, as you say, phoned-in performances for bit parts in later movies damages the overall credibility in a way that, like, Freddy Krueger is less of a horror figure, more of a comedy figure? Now, admittedly, that never happened with Pinhead, but we're talking like Deader and Hellworld areas. Does that damage the initial impact from the early days?
I think it obviously does, but the way I see it is like those movies are normally quite poor. There's a lot of movies in the Hellraiser franchise that are not great, and that's like an understatement. But even in these movies that were like the scripts were not even designed originally to be Hellraiser movies, but they just put them in and made them Hellraiser movies by tacking on little elements here and there, and you can see how it's done and stuff like that. But the best parts of those movies are always when Pinhead turns up on screen, whether it's the last 30 seconds of the movie and stuff like that. To me, that was always the highlight of the movie, just because that's what I wanted to see from a Hellraiser movie. And it always was frustrating that it would obviously be just like such a brief thing at the end normally for some of these films. But I always thought when Doug Bradley comes down there in his makeup, even though it felt like he was probably just taking a paycheck, I feel like I feel like he, even in like the later times when you could see he was getting a bit older and stuff like that, he still like still did the character justice, as much as he could with what he was given, which was not a lot of the time. They would just have him come in, sometimes not even say anything, and I feel like he was still giving what he could.
Do you think Hellraiser has been harmed by never having a consistent protagonist? So obviously Halloween, we have Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode, although limited to a certain degree, Heather Langenkamp as Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street. But Hellraiser doesn't really have one. I know there's a debate that you could say there is a character who appears in 3 of the movies that could be kind of considered that. But compared to the iconic status of those 2 I've just named in the horror franchises, this one doesn't. Do you care about that?
I feel like that might, obviously you got Kirsty in the first, second movie, and then also in Hellseeker as well. She's comes back for that one. And I think the issue was with they set themselves up with like the issue of how Kirsty has to make like a deal with Pinhead, and that's the only way she's able to escape him and stuff like that. Whereas with other franchises, you got other ways of getting out of it because of the nature of like what Pinhead, where he comes from, the whole thing with the main configuration and everything, and it would have been it was too messy to keep like one consistent person around because it kind of like lessens the impact and the danger of like the of Pinhead and like the Cenobites and stuff like that, because if you can escape them so easily and blah blah blah,
Mm.
that kind of like lessens the impact of that stuff. But it felt like to me, obviously, they never expected this to take off in any way, to have to make multiple sequels and whatnot, so they just didn't have a clue where to go with it. I think you can just tell that by watching. But after the second movie, especially, they were influenced by what was happening in other franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street, and they tried to kind of replicate it a little bit too much, and I think that damaged it when they kind of lost like sight of what made the original 2 good to begin with. Yeah.
Well, you do make a very strong point there, because of course it's no secret this is the work of Clive Barker, and he actually stated that he signed away the story and character rights to the production company prior to the release of the first film, not realizing that it would be as successful as it is. So yeah, kind of get that. Of course, folks, it is based off The Hellbound Heart. Who never read that? But Clive Barker himself would return to the franchise himself with this book here, The Scarlet Gospels, that would detail and put Pinhead front and center in hell. And it's a great book. I do urge people to read it if you're a fan of the franchise, as well as comics and stuff like that. No video games, as far as I'm aware.
Not an actual fully fledged video game, but I did see recently that the game Dead by Daylight, it is I don't know, I can't even tell you specifically what the game even is, but I know that
It's
they
4v1. It's one of those 4v1 ones.
yeah, I saw they had Pinhead appear in that as one of the villain characters in that, so that's something in video game form which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't even know how you do a video game of Hellraiser, really.
Yeah, that's a strange one, but I guess if you've seen the movie Hellraiser Hellworld, maybe something like whatever the hell they were doing in that. I don't know, because that's about some sort of online game type thing.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to break these down, because there are 11 movies in this franchise. So we're going to break this apart into what I consider is the sections of Hellraiser specifically. So, for example, a section is the first 3. Hellraiser 1, 2, and 3. Is they're the ones I remember from my youth I saw the most. Then we can throw in Bloodline Inferno, I think, right around there, because that was the first sort of direction change. And then you've got the trio, your Hellseeker, your Dead End, your Hellworld, and they're specifically separated because of the stories and how they were done. Then we will eventually touch upon Revelations as a separate entity, specifically for one reason alone. We'll do the same with Judgment before we touch about a remake. But before then, what is your earliest memory of Hellraiser? And what I mean by that is, do you remember specifically seeing the first Hellraiser before seeing Hellbound, Hellraiser 2? Because that's something I struggle with.
Yeah, I don't know if that's I honestly can't say, because to me like Hellbound, something more memorable about a lot of the stuff's happening, a lot of the stuff that happens in that movie, because they take a lot of the elements and they kind of raise it up to another level. And I feel like the first one is maybe a little bit more forgettable in some ways. So in my mind, when I think back, I do think more of the second one. I feel like maybe watched that more than the first one. and maybe because like the first one is just like an out and out sort of gruesome horror movie that's not like particularly fun to watch. There's not really any fun elements to it. Not like there is necessarily fun elements to the second one, but it has a sort of like different vibe to it in a
Vibe.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It's just not as like the first one's almost like a snuff film type style, where it's just like
Mm.
not that, you're just not that nice to sit down and watch maybe. So maybe that's why, I'm not sure, but I remember them both very well, definitely. Yeah.
When when you think of both films, what's the immediate first thoughts to come to your head? Because you do describe the first one as being I would describe the first one as a grittier, grim, dirtier film overall. Whether it's just the
Yeah.
visual look of it, but the location, it's got sex. And I don't think the second one does really to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But obviously, you talked about the vibe in the second one being more fun, and I actually understand what you mean by that. I think the fact that you have a character who, when he becomes a villain, becomes almost puns, and that's unexpected and elements like that.
Yeah.
But that is still an iconic character for me personally. I don't dislike it for that. I like it for that, particularly as a
Yeah.
contrast to two. But because you put those two together, and I think, yeah, separate those two. We'll do Hell on Earth in a different way because it is a different experience. What scenes immediately jump out from those two movies for you?
From the first one, definitely some of the like, yeah, I mean, like you said, there's the sex scenes that are like quite prevalent in it throughout between Julie and Frank.
Yep.
The scene of Larry coming in with the mattress and cutting his hand on the nail and that looking really
Yeah.
nasty. That always stays with me. Obviously, of Julia luring the men back and hitting them over the head with a hammer and stuff like that, or Frank coming back from the floorboards and his body regenerating and the gore and the nastiness of that. I think like that's what's so interesting about the first two Horizon movies. They're quite different. You can almost separate them like we just have by describing how they're different. And the first one is just it's so gritty, like you said, so gritty and dirty and nasty compared to like the second one, which I think one of the reasons why the second one has is a bit better is because clearly they got a bit more of a budget. I do think you can sense
Mm,
that with the locations and a lot of the effects and stuff like that. But yeah, there's so many memorable moments as well from the second one. Obviously, you mentioned Dr. Channard. Like, I mean, I haven't mentioned it up to now, but I watched this movies. We probably both did way too young, a lot younger than we probably should have. I'm not
yeah.
sure why. I'm not sure why it was there in the collection of videotapes for us to select to watch. As like I think we all just like as a bunch of like siblings, we just put on like Hellraiser to watch or something, which is like
Yeah, hell, it's a fun
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah. And I remember like even though I was quite young and I enjoy these movies, like I remember them. They did scare me as a kid. I can't deny that. How Pinhead was scary to me, and even Doctor Channard. I remember the scene when the doctor like he gets put in the machine by Julia. That used to
Yep.
always and like he gets like the wires stretched across his face and stuff like that. And it used to scare me. I can't deny. And especially like because I remember something that used to scare me was the fact that you see Pinhead as this imposing, scary figure, and the fact Dr. Channard is able to basically like neuter Pinhead and like destroy him so easily, that used to just terrify me, man. That was like crazy. I'm like, if he can do
Mm.
that to him, like that's mad. Yeah, and obviously like Julia and the whole thing with the mattress, that used to like freak me out. Stuff like that, her coming out of the mattress, little things that like siblings would like try and scare you and stuff like that. But yeah, just super super memorable, definitely. Lots of different things. I could probably like say 100 different scenes.
No, you have, like, particularly pretty much just said the entire film, is so to speak, to a certain degree, massive important scene, stuff like that. What I find interesting, so you in the definitive ranking put
Mhm.
Hellbound as the best one of the entire
Yeah,
bunch. Do you still
yeah.
stand by that?
I still stand by it. And I can see why. I feel like the first one does have is a bit weaker in some ways, but yeah, I don't know why. I think, like I said, I can separate the two in my mind as being two very different movies, and it's just a lot more. There's a lot more to the second one that I like love than the first one. Like I said, in terms of like rewatchability, because of like how enjoyable it is to really watch. Like I know what I'm kind of like with the first one. You know exactly what it is. It's kind of very basic. Whereas the second one, there's just so many different interesting intricacies to it, like different scenes and stuff. There's not too many scenes other than like I just said there's a few things that happen, but mostly it's kind of just a lot of like meandering in between Pinhead. Obviously, like you got the first unveiling of Pinhead coming out, which is like iconic and amazing, and that's like probably his best appearance, maybe other than maybe in the second one. whereas in the first one when he appears, and the second one when he appears in the hospital and he
Yeah.
says how Larry he says I'm like burning in hell and he writes it on
Yeah,
the
that's right.
wall.
He's written on the wall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that could be his best appearance, but yeah. What was the question?
Yeah, yeah, no. It was the fact that you're ranking Hellbound 2 is still the best. And the
Yeah,
reason
no, I
why
agree.
I asked
I
that,
still stand by it. I stand by it. Yeah.
the reason why I asked that is I think once upon a time I would have agreed with you, but on rewatches, there are a couple of niggling issues I have with Hellbound that don't exist in Hellraiser. I'm actually going to pose them to you and see what you think of when I've mentioned these. So I do think they're both equally excellent movies. I actually prefer the original's grittiness more than anything else. You mentioned some of the visuals, but spots in it. But like some of the most iconic scenes is when Frank first regenerates as a skeleton and he sort of roars at the sky. I consider that one of the most horrifying things. However, Hellbound introduced the Hellraiser theme, which is fucking
Mm.
huge. That piece
Yeah.
of music is fucking huge, man. And it does have a higher budget with some really fascinating visual imageries. When the girl, Tiffany, is playing the puzzle box and the doors open up either side of her and they sort of walk out in line, that's just a great visual shot. Right. So in the first film, explain this to me because this bugs the fuck out of me. In the first film, Frank takes Larry's skin and obviously looks like Larry because he's wearing Larry's skin. In the second film, Julia takes the skin of some woman hanging up. You see this woman's face and then looks exactly like Julia afterwards. This bugs the shit out of me.
Yeah.
That to me is fucking stupid. And I get it. They wanted Claire back for it. She's a damn good actress and she's brilliant in this. But good God, it's dumb.
Yeah, no, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Obviously, you have to just kind of like ignore that fact, but obviously difficult if you're nitpicking it.
It is nitpicking. I'm going to continue that. I'm not always 100% sure I like the fact that in the second movie, where you kind of create this icon and you're like, okay, now he's going to be an icon. He's front and he's in the cover again, or put him front and center. Oh, yeah. Along comes this guy who neuters him so easily and wipes him out that it just makes Pinner look like a fucking chump. And I don't fully understand the how and why of it, the sort of transformation thing and so on. Also, Kirsty, after him all like, oh yeah, no more games. Like, I swear with Pinhead, Hellraiser, Hellbound, and later ones will just be like, listen, all you got to do is challenge him to anything, dice game. Look, mate, I've got 2 cards. Which one? And he'll be like, oh, yeah, cool, let's play it. You know, that thing. I'm not always sure I like that. And I'm not.
I mean, even back to the first movie, they say how Frank like escaped them, didn't they? So you know, they've always immediately they set them up as being like not that great at their job. You know.
Which is funny because the Scarlet Gospels will deal with the fact that you know, it's a job, and or
Yeah.
saying, you know, it's too happy with certain things. In the world, in the puzzle box, I really kind of want to gauge your opinion of that experience, of how it looks, and particularly when it gets to the Leviathan, and so on. I'm not sure I like that section. I feel like they either needed to go the full whole hog with it, and they weren't too confident to really push it too far. And then it's just sort of is its thing, and that's the end of it. I mean, where do you sit on that section of the movie?
Or the whole in the whole labyrinth section with the
Yeah, the
Leviathan.
labyrinth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always found that like super fascinating. Like, I wanted to know more about that, but then it's kind of like it's part of the movie, and like they don't really delve too deeply into it. But then, like in in the latest movie, they did kind of like. Have you seen the newest
Mm.
one? Yeah, they did do a little bit more to do with that. So I do want. It's kind of the thing where I want to see it delved more deeply into it because, but as someone from the outside looking in, kind of thing, it was kind of like such a big unveiling. And now they have this basically a god like presiding over this labyrinth and the Cenobites. This is where they come from and stuff like that. It was kind of like such a big step up from what the simplicity that we had come from before, and maybe like sometimes the mystery leaving that intact is like a good thing, but
Mm.
you know it piqued my interest in terms of like fascination. You know, I was fascinated into maybe what it was. You know, the same way that like the Doctor is when he goes there. It's like kind of like mind blowing type thing. So the fascination is there, and yeah, that's it.
I'm down with that. I do like the idea of less is more here, and it's almost like let your imagination run wild. Whatever you can picture hell being, it's totally fine. I'm cool with that aspect. What about the ending? The really happy ending where Kirsty and Tiffany just leave this hospital that would have suffered an extreme massacre with bodies everywhere, and they just walk out together.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely not great, and I feel like maybe that's why they never had a sequel immediately follow it because they weren't really sure what like how to follow that up, and maybe they didn't even know how to end it. So that's kind of why it ends that way. It's kind of it is disappointing, and I said it was just like as I was saying, it's quite interesting some of the directions they took in the second movie to delve into the origins of who Pinhead really was and how they used to
Hmm.
see people and stuff like that. How the Cenobites were once people. It's like I don't know if Clive Barker does his book touch on some of these elements, or is this just something
No,
they decided to do
this
themselves?
this is nothing. I mean, the Hellbound Heart is a short story, which doesn't even have the character of Pinhead in it. The
Yeah,
engineer, the
yeah,
engineer is
yeah.
the
Yeah,
main.
so it's like I don't know. I don't know what it feels like. I said it feels like these movies just got so heavily influenced by the things. I think Nightmare on Elm Street is the most obvious one, where it was Freddy, like he's this person and he's this character. Like almost it just seemed like strange to tear down the mystery of like Pinhead and stuff like that and humanize him. And
Mm,
it's like they were purposely trying to make him more of a sympathetic character. Maybe that was the idea because they were like, "Oh, we'll have this Dr. Channard character. You got why are you creating like a new villain when you've got like Pinhead in your second movie? It was like it was quite there's definitely odd elements to it, and
yeah.
like as you nitpick it apart, you know, it is what it is. It's not a perfect movie, obviously, but
Of course. Of course, you didn't even give like a perfect score to that. I think you gave it 8 out of 10.
yeah,
And I do think it's deserving of a score of that high. I'm gauging these
mhm,
because these were always issues I've had when I
yeah,
watch it. But then I would also sort of say there's so many positives in it. Talking about the visuals, you talked about the part where they kind of get humanized, and that I love the fact that it's brave enough to use a child in that.
yeah,
If yeah, it spins around the pillar. I think it's the
It's-
Chatterer, the Chatterer.
yes, it is, yeah, yeah,
It's a cool touch. And then for me, this is where immediately the franchise is downhill. Now, I know there is a weird cult following for
mm,
Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth. And I
mm,
generally think it's one of those where people are just being a bit silly and, just because it's fun to be pushed back on the other side of things. But I
mm,
consider this one of the worst entries in the franchise. I hated it when I was younger. I can appreciate elements of it now, but there's
mm.
so much wrong with it. I really struggle. I've watched it once with recent times with Lou for her to see it more than anything else. Where
Mhm.
do you sit on this one?
I think it's like if you turn like completely turn your brain off and you just enjoy it as sort of like an 80s sort of like
No, you don't get away with that. It's 1992.
I'm sorry, yes, if you go right late 80s early 90s. I think a lot of early 90s stuff was very like 80-ish because it kind of spilled over into that decade.
It did.
So
You're right.
it does have that sort of like 80-ish sort of vibe, but I mean I don't really know. I was talking about some of the decisions they made for like Hellbound. So again, this is just clear influence from Nightmare on Elm Street. They wanted to take this character and make him like a franchise type character where you're taking this villain and you're trying to like make him a bit more lighthearted and stuff like that. So I don't know. I guess he can appeal to like a wider audience or something like Freddy did, the
Mm.
comedy. But I do think there's a lot to like about Hellraiser Hell on Earth because there's a lot of great effects. For one thing, there's a lot of great effects in it. But and I do think Doug Bradley is actually delivering quite a good performance in it throughout. And there are just moments in it that are still very horrific and a lot of good gore and violence and stuff like that. That's enjoyable as a horror movie. And just there are moments in it that I would consider to be somewhat iconic. Obviously, the bit in the church, and I don't know. I mean, I don't hate it. I think like as a movie, it's like quite a fun watch. I think a fun watch. Yeah.
Oh, we do disagree in this. Well, I recognise the positives of the violence and gore. I think there are some good effects, as you said, and how it's done and elements like that. This to me gets everything wrong. It's got a pair of protagonists that are some of the absolute worst and
Mm,
most unwatchable, boring ass people in it. I never wanted. The last thing I wanted from a Hellraiser movie was a Pinhead that was quip joking, laughing, being all silly and stuff like that. The idea was mystery. We already have characters in horror that are like, having fun with their murders. I don't want that. I don't need that. I always got the impression he was stoic. He was a priest. He's a leader, the Order of the Gash, all of that stuff. And then you got him running around town going, oh, look at me, I'm Jesus. And it's like,
yeah.
no, this is not working. It's not working for me personally. I cannot, as a as a throwaway movie that you could put on with someone, right, who doesn't know the franchise at all, I think they could totally, a casual fan could totally maybe enjoy it for aspects like that. Particularly, as you said, it is violence and gore, and it does have some intriguing moments. I tend to think of like the club massacre and elements of that when I think of that aspect and so on. But it's also a film that delves way into necessary nonsense. It's weird. On one hand, it wants to be this kind of quippy, action-packed, more uber-violent, kind of fast-paced movie. And then it's got this long-winded, nonsensical stuff about Pinhead's past as a soldier and going through the window and bringing them together, and all that crap is terrible, while also then trying to make the main character something as they live together, and she's trying to help her get off drugs and all this sort of shit. And none of this makes sense, because Hellraiser, up to this point as well, had always struggled with an ending, from the puzzle box with the homeless guy at the end of the first one, to the pillar rising up in the second, to the pillar now being a thing in the third one, to then obviously how the third one ends with her putting the box into the cement, and that apparently influencing the creation of the building, which will then be completely undone by the next film with how that building exists, all of that and so on. It's very nonsensical. But then on alongside you have the thing that I hate the most about it, and this is the new Cenobites. Oh my God. Not only are they incredibly unimaginative, and Hellraiser will suffer from this going forward, incredibly unimaginative designs, but they proceeded to make them talk and be quippy. And every time Doc, the character of Doc, which is this camera in the eye, speaks, I just want to throw something at the TV. It's bad. It's like it's like you said, they looked at Nightmare on Elm Street franchise and went, oh yeah, look, he'll shoot explosives out of his eyes and then say, that's a wrap, because he's a cameraman. Yeah. That's not even funny. That's just bad. That's just bad stuff. So
then it's like, it was there in Hellbound with Dr. Channard, so it's like almost it was already there, and then it obviously they took it to an 11 in the next one, but it's like it already kind of was an element of the franchise, you know?
Yeah, but at least that was that was only a part of it, and it was also
he said like the doctor is in and stuff like that, or.
But you said it yourself. He's scary. He was imposing. He was an incredible design with lots of different moving elements, from the thing on his head to the wires across his face to the fingers and the things coming out of his hand. This is just some guy with a camera jammed in it. That's it. You got the bird whose neck's cut open so a cigarette sitting there. It's dumb. Oh. Why is a cigarette there? You've got JP who has the drill for his head and makes him go.
That used to freak me out, man. As a kid, that whole piston thing in his head. It's freaked me out. Then,
the ending as well, where they just surround Joey and they're all just going hair to her. What the fuck is that?
I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying like it's like almost so bad. It's like enjoyable type of thing. Just if you don't think of it as like a Hellraiser movie, I just think like they walked into like an issue with the whole humanizing him in the previous movie, and they that was there, and then they couldn't take it back. It was like they had to go forward with it, and they went further with it, and they just wanted to turn Pinhead into Freddy or Jason or something. And obviously Pinhead was a character, even though he's supposed to be scary, you can't help but be like, you can't help but, you know, be interested in him as a character, almost like him as a character. So they just were like, oh, you know what, he's the star of the show, so we got to try and make him so he's not like too like terrifying, so maybe he can have a mass appeal or something. And I don't know.
I don't think. I think you make some fair points there. I definitely feel like there was an urge to make him, and it's weird because they would almost go backwards on that in the next one. The other thing, last thing I was saying this one is, I do agree with you. I do get the impression that Doug Bradley was quite having fun. Well, that leads us to Bloodline, really, which 1996, this one, and this is obviously considered I think this is considered the real downward curve of the series. Weirdly enough, I actually have a lot of affection for this movie, in the sense I can see what they were trying to do. I can see the thinking behind it to try and create an origin story that wrapped up neatly by mixing it between future times and past times. But I also feel like this is one of the ones that had a definitive ending to the franchise as a whole. If it'd been the final movie, you could be like, okay, they wrapped up that neatly and so on. Its problems are simply that it's incredibly boring. It is messy as fuck. It is messy because they needed more time and a more coherent story. And there are a lot of reasons why. You can read a lot about that online as to why that is the case. It's got some of the worst characters in it. And new Pinhead's just in a weird role in this, and the Cenobites around him are pretty boring.
You know, I think it was a fascinating idea to delve into the origins of the configuration, how that was created by this architect, and this whole thing about how it passed through the whole bloodline, and it's like that's like an interesting idea, but like you said, it's very long, it drags in places, and it's just it boring, I think is the key word. It's definitely one of those ones that if I'm like I'm going to rewatch the whole franchise, it's not one I'm looking forward to sitting through again, unfortunately. Even though, like you said, technically it's not like a bad made movie, and the acting is actually pretty good in it. But yeah, it's just a bit long. Yeah,
Yeah, I do want to give some props to Bruce Ramsey, who obviously plays Philippe
yeah,
Lemchenard and John Merchant. He plays a lot of roles in this, and he does try, but he's hindered by a poor script.
100%. Yeah, it's true.
There is one good reason to watch this, though. If you are a fan of Adam Scott, be it from Parks and Recreation or Krampus and stuff like that, go see this to see one of his earliest roles as Jacques, and that laugh your face off about that role. I'd love to. It's one of them you'd love to meet him, and he'd probably expected to talk about his major films, Step Brothers, Krampus, Parks and Recreations. No, mate, I want to talk to you about Hellraiser Bloodline.
That's funny because there's another really famous actor in the movie Hellworld, Henry Cavill, in one of his very first acting roles in that. And me and my partner have always said that we ever met him, we would mention the fact that he was in Hellraiser Hellworld, and to just get his reaction from that someone that knows that he was in that movie and like how that happened and everything. Yeah.
And now we hit the sort of section of the franchises where the scripts weren't Hellraiser movies. They were written for other films, they were going to be other things, then got transformed and turned into Hellraiser movies thereabout. It is Inferno Hellseeker. No, we're gonna no, actually, no, we'll do that in a bit. I'm gonna separate because although Inferno falls into this category, Inferno's a little bit different. It's a little
Mm.
bit of a special movie. You have a lot of positive things to say about it,
Mm.
so I feel like just tell us why you think this is a good movie.
I just really think that Inferno, in my mind anyway, like the idea of what a Hellraiser movie should almost what it should be, I think this movie does it incredibly well, even though it's one of those movies that was clear as day supposed to be something else entirely. And they do kind of do the whole tacking on the Hellraiser thing, but I think it somehow works because of what the subject matter is. It's about this mysterious serial killer and
The engineer.
the engineer, and it ties in so cleverly, I think, to a Hellraiser movie better than any of them ever did. And I love the idea of Pinhead really like torturing someone about the issues they have in their life and stuff like that, and using it against them, and turning into this whole like big nightmare in your within your mind and everything, and you not knowing what's reality and what isn't, and the whole being caught in like a loop type thing that happens at the conclusion of the movie. I just think it's really well done, and I remember specifically, I think I mentioned it in my review, and I talk about it all the time. I think the makeup effects they used on Pinhead in this movie were some of the best. I think because it's so well done, and there's some really great lighting effects they do. A particular scene where Hellraiser Pinhead is in this scene with I can't remember the main character's name in it. The cop.
Joseph Thorne.
Yeah, Thorne. Yeah, he's torturing him about his I think it's his wife and kid, and it's like there's like a swing set, and Pinhead is standing there, and it's snowing, and his makeup effects is so like white and stuff like that. It looks really great. But yeah, I just think it really just the overall concept of it of what Pinhead would do to you if you open the box, not simply just torturing you physically, but mentally, and I think that like it just does that so well.
Well, it's Joseph Thorne's pain and suffering example and how they utilize it too. It is a movie that does have this constant nightmarish dreamlike effect. And while that might initially feel jarring, confusing to watch, this film will happily explain itself wonderfully by the end. I do agree it's a strong film in itself, and they did work hard to tie Hellraiser into this. The problem is, of course, no other Hellraiser movie had done this up to this point. So it does automatically feel disjointed because of that. Provided you've got to do it like this, you've got to do it like we're saying, know what it is, know that it's not a Hellraiser movie per se, and
Mm.
that it's more on the fringes of that, and you can get
Yeah,
along with it better more than that. Yeah, you know, and I also really love that it broke the norm. It gave us Craig Sheffer as Detective Joseph Thorne, and it said,
mhm.
oh, this is a bad guy, and he's a bad guy to the end. Like he's a
Yeah.
bad guy who's getting what he deserves.
I like that you're not supposed to like him at all. You're supposed to think he's a piece of shit. And almost, it's supposed to show you a point of view of maybe like that he deserves what is happening to him, and you're supposed to like
Mhm.
think in your mind like, what's right about what's happening and kind of thing. But also, it was kind of like a throwback to a small scene you see in Hellbound when Kirsty she goes to the labyrinth and she sees Frank in his own sort of personal hell.
Yep.
And I kind of like I love the idea of that because like I said, it's about Pinhead. Yes, you can be torn apart, like he says, he'll tear your soul apart. But I think there's more to it than just the physical aspect. It's like I said, the mental side, which I thought was more fascinating to delve into, and I think this movie did that so well that, like you said, you hadn't seen done before.
Yeah, a lot of positivity about Inferno. So we're now going
Mm.
to put the three together. This is Hellseeker, Deader, and Hell World. These three, more than anything else, are the most jammed in separate stories that then jam in Hellraiser into any of. Now, I'm going to... It's the easiest question of all. Of those three, which is the best in your opinion?
The best. I mean,
Yeah, of those three specifically.
I think probably Hellworld, just because it tries something really ridiculous. It tries to go
Mm.
super meta, so it's memorable for that reason. Also, it has Lance Henriksen in it, and I think he's actually really great in the movie. His actual performance is pretty good. And if I recall the ending actually being quite fast, quite interesting about where they get buried and but then they're like ghosts trapped in the house. I don't even know. It's super random, but like it's memorable. It's got Henry Cavill in it, and yeah, Lance Henriksen's killing in it. He's great in everything he's in. The other two are really forgettable and boring to me. So yeah,
So I agree with you. I actually think of the three, I think Hellworld's probably the most interesting
yeah,
of the three.
hmm
Weirdly, though, then that means we're both not looking, which we think would go to Hellseeker, because obviously that brings back Kirsty Cotton and then
yes,
ties her into this in a really pointless, stupid way, really mainly based around her husband, Trevor D. Winters.
exactly. And it's just that they do the whole thing of Kirsty making a deal again, and it just felt like at this point it felt like a running joke. Like you said, it's
Yeah.
become a joke at this point. Like she'll make a deal. He's like, oh, it's just ridiculous, and it just
Yeah,
felt
I'll give you X amount of souls, and the husband's one of them. Like, it's one of those annoying where it's like, oh, you have to have this twist ending, and you're like, it's a shit twist ending, guys.
yeah. I felt like maybe they saw what New Nightmare did with bringing back Head Camp as, and they wanted to be. Then they'll bring back their like legacy character, but they just did it completely wrong in the wrong worst way. Yeah, not a fan at all. I think I've only watched that one like a few times because I remember it being also very boring. Yeah,
Yeah, there's one we missed out that I've watched once, and I will leave it that way. It is Deader. I
yeah.
think it is the worst entry in the franchise, even worse than another one later on.
I think they also are. They feel like the cheapest ones, like in terms of the effects and just the sets, everything. The cheapness really started to take hold at that point. Yeah.
Well, I believe Deader and Hellworld were filmed back to back because Deader was released in 2005, June 7th. Hellworld was released September 6, 2005. I believe they were both filmed in Eastern Europe for cost. That's a major aspect. You will see other franchises have
Mm.
done that too around that period of time. So what's hilarious about that is often you get Eastern Europeans pretending to be American teenagers. At least with Deader, it doesn't pretend it's somewhere else.
That's true. It doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. Those are the movies we say, look, if you're not interested in watching through the entire franchise, just don't bother. Don't bother. You're going to see occasionally something interesting. You say Hellworld has an interesting concept, some interesting visuals, the house, the ending, and so on. And Lance Henriksen and a young Henry Cavill, and so on. But that's about it. It's still not a good movie. None of these are good movies.
No, and especially Hellworld. Actually, one of the worst parts of it is the fact that it has the most shoehorned in like scene with Pinhead ever. I'm not even sure he says anything, but it's when he appears at the end to Lance Henriksen, and I'm
Yep.
pretty sure he just like slices him in half, and that's it. And
Yep.
it's so short and sweet, and it's just like that was so filmed last minute. This movie was totally supposed to be something else entirely.
Yeah. Yeah. It all makes sense. How it should have been, like, just the game. But oh goodness me. But then, like, it's not like it gets any better, because in 2011 we would then of course get Hellraiser Revelations, and this would be the first time Doug Bradley did not play Pinhead. He would be played by a guy called Stephen Smith Collins, but the voice was done
Mm,
by Fred Taskasori. This is the laziest fucking, clearly influenced by modern films like Hostel and
yeah.
stuff like that. I heavily dislike this. I heavily dislike this because of how silly it is, how stupid it is, and how it does this idea where it's like, oh, one of the younger ones will become a villain himself and become like a young Pinhead, but his nails in his head will be different because like he's a protege. And then of course you have this iconic character played by an actor who clearly didn't even have the voice for the role, and none
Mm.
of it fucking works. He does not have to say. He looks stupid.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think when they had put the makeup and stuff like that, they'd have been like, maybe we should recast this, but
Mm,
you can tell again the budget is super low. In a lot of ways, it feels like they're remaking and reusing a lot of the elements from the original Hellraiser movie. I mean, it was a nice idea to go back to basics, I guess, to try and do something a bit different, maybe with a more modern spin. But it's yeah, there's nothing like to like about it. Like maybe the effects, I suppose at times, like you said, the guy that is made to look like the new Pinhead type thing, like the effects are not too terrible. I remember at the time I was quite surprised they were actually pretty decent considering the budget. But yeah,
mm.
there's nothing to enjoy about this one. No.
It all takes place in this fucking living room. The majority it takes place in this living room with these two unlikable families and this subplot of this kid who's like suddenly supposed to be a good guy, but it's not acting like a villain. And later we'll find it's because he has the skin of his friend, and
Yeah,
elements like that. It's really fucking slow as well.
it is the bottom of the barrel in my opinion in terms of the Hellraiser franchise.
It's dead as worse, but it's like you talk about like 0.5% between them. Like it's literally just
I mean,
there's very little between them.
Dead still has Doug Bradley, so it wins for that
Mm.
reason.
Okay, okay. Which then brings us to a fascinating entry that I was actually, when I watched, I thought was actually really interesting and I enjoyed
Mm.
elements of it. But people generally seem to hate it. I'm not entirely sure why. So this is Hellraiser Judgment. And this would be an attempt to take Hellraiser almost back to like its
Mm.
core idea of hell and factions and priests and elements like that. And I really enjoyed that. It does suffer heavily from being influenced by Saw. You can see that
Mm.
throughout it. It
Yeah.
does. But I ended up really liking a lot of elements of this, particularly in regards to how they portray Pinhead in this. It again is a new actor, someone that certainly looks a bit better than the others. I'm trying to Paul T. Taylor. It plays
Mm.
him. He often is just sitting in like a throne, not really saying much. But they even changed the outfit as well and how he looks. And I really like that too. And the idea of this battle between heaven and hell for souls, I just kind of like that. I don't know. How do you
Mm.
feel about this one?
Yeah, it's not one that many people really talk about at all, but I remember at the time, and my memory, if it serves me well, I do actually remember thinking this wasn't too bad. I did like the idea of you being brought to this mysterious place, and there's this weird guy who like goes through the different things you've done in your life that were good and bad, and
Mm,
basically like a sort of mock like
cool.
judgment, you know,
Yeah.
like a court, and you're getting judged, and the help like Pinhead is residing over this as the judge, jury, and sort of executioner of this whole system. And I think that was a really fascinating idea and a really great way to take clearly a movie that has like a low budget and blah blah blah, and like doing it in a decent way. But then it does get messy with the whole heaven and hell thing and the battle for souls. And there's elements towards the end with where Pinhead, like you said, it was doing well, but he was kind of this background character. There was a lot of mystery surrounding him. I thought the makeup looked great. I actually really liked the guy. I thought he had a lot of screen presence, and there's an example of someone in the makeup that actually did look quite good. Then they started messing it up, I thought, near the end, where Pinhead becomes more to the forefront of the story, and they turn into this whole heaven and hell thing. And then, yeah, the whole bit with the ending and him
Yeah.
being turned human, and I don't know where the hell they were going with that. It completely falls off a cliff, like about the halfway point. And there's a lot of like the gore in it and stuff like that. It's kind of like gross out type stuff, where it's like it's not like it's obviously there's blood and stuff like that, but it feels like it's being more like grotesque and
Yeah.
disgusting just for like the sake of it to try and like make like kind of like yeah, just for like the sake of it kind of thing. But
No,
no,
I
yeah,
understand. I do. That's the comparison to Saw I make.
yeah. I thought it was definitely a mile better Revelations, but it at the same time, like because of the way it ends, it's pointless because it doesn't go anywhere and it's never going to go anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, look at what we've talked about there, what you've just described, but no point did you say, oh yeah, it's got a really interesting and likable lead character. I don't even remember who the people were. I know it's some detectives,
Yeah,
but that's about it.
yeah.
All I remember.
There's also a subplot about detectives, and it's just like that is just it's very Saw-like, and it's very boring. Yeah.
Not only that, as well, this film does something I hate movies for doing, and it says, "Hey, this movie stars a famous horror person," and the word "star"
Yeah.
should mean something, right? And we see all the time. I get it; it's marketing. You know, you'll see starring Tony Todd, and he'll be in this movie for all of 2 minutes. This one stars Heather Langenkamp, who plays the
Yeah.
landlady, who is in literally like 2 scenes and probably amounts to about a minute of the film. And you're like, "Fuck off, guys."
If I recall, she's like barely even in like a frame. Like, I'm pretty sure you see a frame of her, and then beyond that, it's not even clear that she's even like still there. Like almost, it's so
Blink and
bad.
you'll miss it.
I don't even know how that happened. Like how much money she could have got paid for that. Couldn't have been much, but it must have been worth it, I suppose.
And that brings us to the 2022 reboot.
Mm,
Reboot, not remake, reboot of the franchise. This
mm,
was released to Hulu in October 2022. A big hoo-ha over the idiocy of them not being able to get distribution for other territories, resulting in a shit ton of piracy. Well done,
mm,
folks. You do it to yourselves. I've got no fucking sympathy. Eventually, would eventually get it distributed in this country in particular, but way after the buzz had died. Way
yeah,
off the interest was there. And this one always fascinated me because I could not for the life of me understand why this was so hyped up. But I realized I realized afterwards what the hype was. And it's not that people were hyped for a new Hellraiser movie, because why would you be? It's not like the franchise has been fucking good, has it? It's a
mm,
beleaguered franchise from pretty much the third film onwards. And that's talking like 7 films later. It's because people are starved of horror. And what I mean by that is starved of horror that isn't, hey, guess what? Ghosts,
yeah,
paranormal, fucking possessions. Here's another Conjuring movie. Here's another this. People were starved of it. We've been starved of it. So any time, even if it's just another entry in a beleaguered franchise or something that isn't necessarily disturbing, it's just deserving of a new film, we always get excited for it. People generally get excited for it because, good God, it is not, and I'm going to use this as my reference point for the entirety of 2023, it is not the Pope's Exorcist. Because, good God, is there an example of we are just lazy as fuck now, you know? So, of course, we're going to get fucking excited when, even if it's a beleaguered franchise, because let's try this again. Let's see if we can reboot this, because there's no point doing another sequel. I didn't want to
yeah,
see it. And all the changes I heard they were making, I was down. I know there was a brief bit of, oh my God, there's going to be a female fucking pinhead.
mm,
It's like, grow up, man. Doug Bradley's too. It's like when people scream about Robert Englund getting back into the makeup. It's like, look, those days are done. They moved on. Let's
mm,
move on. Let's give someone a new chance, give a new idea to this franchise. So I was pro a lot of Hellraiser. I didn't love the fact it was just being called Hellraiser because I feel like that's played out. Let's just call it the same name as the original movie. Don't do that. Come up with something
mm.
newer then, if that's the case. Just avoid Hellraiser in general, you know?
True, true. But then it's like they're trying to like separate it. They're trying to like separate it like that. Forget all
It's
that stuff.
confusing. It's
It's the whole
confusing.
it's the whole like recall thing, isn't it? Calling, like the whole like Scream, where they made Scream 2022, and then they made this new one that's called it is considered Scream 6 now. But that
It's called
or
Scream 6.
yeah, or then there's Halloween. They made that new Halloween trilogy that's just called
Mm-hmm.
Halloween. It's like that's like the thing to do, isn't it? It's like if they ever made a new Friday, Nightmare on Elm Street movie, they would just call it Nightmare on Elm Street. That's what they would call it. Yeah,
Which I have no problem, no real big issue with, and so on. But I guess, I mean, I I was pleasantly surprised. I did think this would be decent. I was confident that it couldn't really be any worse, an attempt to do it and so on. I enjoyed this. I don't necessarily think it. Again, I think people are starved and people will often watch something, I find, and then immediately jump online and be like, that was the best thing ever, without letting it sit and sink in and analyze it a little bit. Because you can say, like, immediately after watching something, like I came up, I'm going to use an off the cuff example I've here, right? I came out of watching the Super Mario Brothers movie a few days ago at the time of recording, going, man, I really enjoyed the shit out of that. That's probably like the best video game movie adaptation I've ever seen. I think that might be an 8 or 9 out of 10.
mm,
Spoilers, when would later stop, think about it, and write a
yeah,
review, it actually dropped to a 6 out of 10. for me because
It's
I
funny.
started.
It's funny because I don't want to segue into talking about that. But I had the exact same experience with that movie, I've got to say. Just quickly put that out there, where
Yeah,
it could be like
yeah,
that when it comes with something when you watch it and you feel the hype. I had it with like a lot of the later the Star Wars trilogy that was released, where when it's on the cinema and they're so big and flashy, they just get in your mind and you're like, oh, that was such a great experience. But then you go home and you sit down and you think about it, you're like, oh, I didn't really like that, and you could have done this and that better, and like, oh, what the hell were they thinking there? I have that exact same experience. But I think that's kind of the same thing with this Hellraiser movie. Is like
yeah.
I really liked it at the time. It's like when I watched it, I was like, this is actually pretty. This is great. But then as time's gone on, I've kind of been like, that movie. I don't really remember that much about what happens in that movie. What really
You
happens
nailed
in that
it.
movie, and also like no one's really talking about this movie anymore. Why is that? Like I don't see anyone posting about it or saying like, oh, that was great. But at first, everyone was so hyped about how the gore and the makeup effects and stuff like that. But I don't even really see anyone talk about that anymore. And there's no like hype surrounding it about a potential sequel. The other day I googled it. There's no one's talking about anything to do with that. None of the actors, nothing. So it's like it must not have done well. So I just feel that almost makes it worse because then if it didn't even do well, then it's just ultimately kind of pointless, isn't it? As well, it's not one of those movies that have come out and they've arrogantly, and I thought it was a bit arrogant, the movie, to try and like believe that the hype would be big enough for them to make a franchise because it felt like that's the way the movie set out. This is like the first movie in a franchise because it raises so many questions. Like I said, it does the whole it raises questions about the Leviathan,
Hmm.
element and stuff like that, and it doesn't deliver them in this movie. It leaves you like hanging like, okay, that's what we're going to get to next time.
Yep.
I thought the actress who played the female Pinhead, they were good. They had presence, which I think is an important thing that Pinhead needs to have on screen. But they kind of made this movie where Pinhead was, whereas like with Doug Bradley, he's clearly like the top lead Cenobite, whereas in this. They're the lead Cenobite, but it feels like they're just one of the Cenobites, which I think is more in line with what Clive Barker originally had in mind anyway. So
Hmm.
that was fine. And we can talk about the makeup effects and how they're maybe a bit too clean looking. I think
That
that
is
was,
an issue.
yeah. I mean, the thing that they got so well in the original Hellraiser and Hellbound is that the effects, they were really gruesome looking. They were, you know, you got the melt. You got the like the Butterball character, for example. The skin is all melted and stuff like that. It's all shiny and all like, there's like sweat and stuff like that, and it looked dirty and grimy. Whereas
Yep.
in this it looks amazing. The effects are unbelievable, but it looks like an effect. It looks like a prosthetic. It doesn't look like real skin and real the things. The viscera isn't there, kind of thing. Yeah,
You absolutely fucking nailed it, man. When you started that with the simple fact is that this actually isn't that memorable. And I've
yeah,
just had to bring up your review to remind myself of who the hell the actual characters were. And I'm like, oh yeah, Riley. Oh yeah, okay. Right. And it's like, oh shit. And I realized I've only seen it once. So maybe it needs another watch, and maybe a second watch would perhaps be good to sort of see and maybe nitpick it, because I, like you, came out of it feeling a lot more positive. And I'm not being negative now. I think in this beleaguered franchise, it's up there as one of the better movies. Absolutely is, considering how poor it's been
yeah.
up to this point. From what I consider was, say, Hellraiser 3, this is any uptick is well worth it. And there is supposedly talk of a HBO TV series, but I
That's
don't
true.
know how
Yeah,
that's going to work.
that is true. But I don't think it's related in any way to this. I think it's a completely separate entity. That's what I heard when I heard about this TV
Mm,
show. So I don't know what's going on with the rights to the movies, because there was obviously a lot of, originally it was like Dimension Films, they had
yeah.
the hold of the rights and they would release new movies just so they could continue to hold on to the rights. But then I think they've lost it now, and I don't know who has it, but someone's making a TV show, someone's making a movie. Feels like it's kind of all up in the air who owns it. But yeah, I think the reason why I liked the new Hellraiser movie, because it was just basically, my point I tried to get across in my review is that I think it was just a solid, average Hellraiser movie, and that's kind of what the franchise needed. It needed just something that was kind of basic and average, and not because
Same.
it had so much this had so much shit that come before it, basically. So much that Hellraiser was literally hanging on by a thread at this point. This movie needed, it didn't have to be amazing. It just had to be decent, and I think that's what it was. Yeah,
Mm. I
yeah,
like that. I like that. A safe sort of like, let's not push the boat too far. We need to make a safe entry so people have a bit more confidence in this franchise.
I do feel like it did. I feel like it did rebuild a little bit of the confidence in the franchise, and that was all it kind of needed to do. And then like now you have hopefully, I would like a sequel, and then maybe beyond that you could be a bit more adventurous because it felt a little bit safe in places. So, so hopefully maybe if they get a sequel, yeah.
Well, come on, people. Look, you can't have it both ways. If you want another Insidious, which you're getting, and you want another Conjuring, which you will get, and you want a Pope's Exorcist 2 or another Nun movie or another, no doubt, eventually to return Paranormal Activity movie, then don't go bother spending money on these movies. Don't spend money on Evil Dead Rise and things like that, whilst at the same time screaming about how much you want those movies. You can't win both ways. You can critique it, you can watch it and perhaps say, well, look, it wasn't as good as I hoped or whatever, but hell, it's got to be better than what we're currently still trawling our sorry asses through, particularly in such, and I use the term again, beleaguered franchise, which kind of, I wanted to bring this back to the overarching thing, which is, why do you think this is a franchise? Bear in fucking mind, right? How many bad, and I know it's not like par for the course because lots of franchises have bad entries in them. Look at the Children of the Corn series, that still has tons of entries and so on. But why is Hellraiser considered, right? We have Nightmare on Elm Street, we have Friday the 13th, we have Halloween. These are considered our top three, but just slightly underneath it, you have Hellraiser. And then below that, you have the likes of Children of the Corn, Leprechaun, and stuff like that. Why is Hellraiser up there and not fucking down there?
It's a good question, but I think a lot of it does go down to what my original answer was when you asked, "What do I think of when I think of Hellraiser?" And I just think Doug Bradley's
Character.
performance as Pinhead is just that. I think it just is iconic, and it's like Robert England with Freddy. When an actor can deliver a performance that is just that memorable, I think it can transcend like even bad movies in the franchise. And Freddy Krueger is a great example of that. This a lot of those movies suck, man, but when Freddy's on screen, you love it. Just like I said with Hellraiser movies. So Dead, for example, a shit movie, but then Doug Bradley will come out at the end. He'll say a line or two.
Well, all
He'll
cap and cheer.
yeah, and that's what you came to see, and it's like the crowd pleasing moment that everyone just came to see, and I think that's why like you don't really get stuff like that anymore. You don't really get that in new franchises of horror movies, do you? Really, with these iconic like characters that can go these distances. They're always about like new characters and stuff. They can't. It's hard to recapture. I think it's just like
Yeah, it is.
lightning in a bottle type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you've nailed it there, because when you you buy a poster of icons of horror, and you'll have your Freddy Krueger's, you have your Michael Myers, you have your Jason Voorhees, you might have Pennywise, maybe you'll throw in Leatherface and so on, but you will of course have Pinhead. You won't have the Cenobites as a group or anything like that. You'll have Pinhead.
But it's a good question because we've just gone through the entire franchise, and we would say that maybe two or three of the movies in the entire franchise, well, all you consider to actually be good to great.
Yeah.
Beyond that, we're here to basically saying the rest of them are pretty terrible movies, and it's like, why then would this character be so iconic when you do get a lot of more modern franchises which maybe are like much better movies technically, but like they don't have characters in them that are ever going to be considered like that sort of level. But why is that?
I'm
I don't even really know, to be honest.
trying
I
to
mean,
think
that's
of a modern iconic, like,
like a franchise. I mean, what franchises have been The Conjuring? Got the two Warren. You know, they're not going to be on any posters, are they? I mean, I don't know. It's hard. This isn't really the franchises anymore. I suppose that's also another thing. You kind of just get the one and done type things. These days with horror. Yeah, tough one. That's kind
it
of
is a
asking like
tough
what.
one.
That's like asking the question of what it takes to make like a character in anything popular or anything. I have no idea. It's just that's what you can criticize them for what they did with Hellraiser 3, I suppose, but they were just trying to tap into the fact that this character become really popular and trying to get him more like a wide appeal and stuff. And I guess, yeah, it didn't
A
work
lot of
out.
it
But
a lot of it's sort of spamming. I mean, people forget like the majority of the Friday the 13th movies came out in the 80s. That's how spammy that was. Nightmare on Elm Street, a huge majority of them came out in the 80s as well. They were spamming these movies, so the character was on screen every year to 2 years in some circumstances. Hellraiser had bigger gaps, but even the first two films came out in with a 1 year gap. So they were quick to like follow up on that and then put him front and center.
that's the thing is, I also like we are the type of people that have watched all these movies, but like we're by far in the minority of that. Most people, there's a reason why they release Halloween that just is a sequel just the original, because most people just watch the original and then didn't watch anything beyond that. That's what
Yeah.
most people, you think with the new Hellraiser movie, most people that maybe were interested in that, they're thinking of like, oh, the original Hellraiser movie or this or Hellbound. They're not, they probably don't even know that these other movies even exist because they're all straight to video, and like we're the only
I
people
would
that
love
actually,
to, I would
yeah,
love to get a poll on that, where the people who watched 2022's Hellraiser, how many of the previous franchises have you actually watched? Was it
yeah.
literally the original? Had you even seen Hellbound? I wonder how many people would actually say just Hellraiser 3.
I think it'd be quite high, but yeah,
We'll do it
you
again.
know, ultimately, I'm a huge Hellraiser fan. I love Pinhead and Doug Bradley as Pinhead, and but it's not perfect by any means whatsoever.
I agree. For all my criticism for it, I literally would say that there will be a point, probably in a year, 2, 3 years down the line, where I'm just going to go to my wife and go,
Mm,
we've got the whole day. Do you fancy starting Hellraiser again and just going through the franchise for the hell of it? Because it'll,
yeah,
like with pain and suffering and things like that, you get a tattoo and you're like, oh, that hurts. Don't do it again. Half an hour later, another childbirth. I mean, women, they literally go through immense amount of pain and then we'll have more children. There's all these things that we forget. And just like the pain and suffering caused by Hellraiser, you'll forget and be like, oh, yeah, you know what? I can do that. I can do that.
I mean, sitting through some of those movies is like torture, isn't it? So
He nailed it. He
it's
nailed
quite
it.
meta. It's quite meta in that way, isn't
Yes, absolutely. That is look back on the Hellraiser franchise. You got any thoughts? Did you kind of agree with some of our likes and dislikes and opinions and things like that? And where do you kind of sit on all of this? You know what to do. Let us know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please help us out by giving us a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button. If you really liked what you saw, consider donating to keep the website and channel running by buying us a coffee via our coffee page or picking up some merch from our Big Cartel store. You can check us out on gbhbl.com as well as via our social media, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, as well as listen to our interviews via SoundCloud, Apple Music and Spotify. Just search for GBHBL. Games, horror and heavy metal. What else is life for?